As I mentioned in the previous video, in the exam mainly you will be asked to do things with the curves and levels adjustments, but it's also important to understand how to work with the other adjustment layers, because there might be questions about them as well. So I will just give you a couple of quick examples here. And again, this is not a thorough explanation of all the adjustment layers in Photoshop. You should look into all of them and check out each of the features for them. I'm just going to highlight some of those options that I think might come up in the exam, and it's definitely good to know about. First of all, difference between vibrance and saturation. That's a very important thing to understand. While saturation in the vibrance adjustment layer will bring all the colors intensity together up or down, vibrance will try to normalize the colors, so it won't increase the already intense colors as much as the less intense colors. So it will try to harmonize the color intensity, while saturation will bring everything with the same amount. So as you can see, 100% saturation is quite intense on the skin tones and also on the trousers in this case. And if I set this back to 0 and increase vibrance to 100%, then we can see it's much more subtle. So as you can see, the trousers and the skin tones are still perfect, so they are not too saturated or oversaturated. But we also managed to increase a little bit the colors of the background, which was more gray and dull before. So vibrance is definitely much more subtle than saturation, but it can still really pump up the intensity of colors in your images. Another adjustment layer which is useful to know about is the hue saturation, and it's very commonly used in Photoshop workflows, because it has a couple of very important features, like changing the hue, saturation, and lightness. Very important parameters or attributes of our images. Well, it's very good for fine-tuning colors for CMYK images that are out of gamut of an output device. So you will always be able to choose colors here, red, yellows, greens, and cyan, blue, and magentas, which are the main inks in printing. Once you select any of these, you will be restricted or limited to change those colors only. So in this case, if I select reds, for example, I can reduce the saturation for those colors without changing any of the other colors in the image. If I reset this, I can show you that we also have the targeted adjustment tool, just like for curves. So if I click on that, and I click and drag the colors to the left on the bridge, I remove the reds. Or I can drag it up and then I can intensify those colors. And I can again click on, for example, on the building behind and reduce those colors. Plus also I can reduce the blues. If I click on the sky, I can reduce these darker blues, even the greens. And then I have only the warm colors visible now, the very strong red on the bridge and a little bit of the colors on the building. So all this I've done just using the targeted adjustment tool and dragging left and right to change the saturation. If I hold down Command, I can change the hue of selected colors as well. By just dragging it left and right while holding down Command or Control on PC, I use again the targeted adjustment tool, but for changing the hue instead of the saturation. And once again, I just reset this adjustment and show you that with Colorize, you can create a monochrome tinted image effect, where you can change the tint with the hue, and you can also adjust the saturation and lightness. So Colorize is another option which might come up in the exam. It's interesting to check out the black and white adjustment layer as well, because that also has a targeted adjustment tool, plus it also has a tint option. So tint in black and white adjustment layer is very similar to Colorize in hue saturation. And if I turn that off, I can select the targeted adjustment tool and control how bright each of the colors in my image will show up. So clicking on the bridge and dragging right and left, I can change the intensity or the brightness of red colors. Because once we turn the image into black and white, we only work with lightness values instead of working with colors. And the other adjustment layers which worth checking out is the color balance, where you can change the overall mixture of colors, and you can also focus your corrections to shadows, midtones, and highlights. Plus, you also have an additional option called Preserve Luminosity. I'm just going to show it to you. If I drag it to the red, then that will increase reds and at the same time reduce cyan colors in the image. And I can drag the bottom slider to the left, which again increase the intensity of yellows and decrease the intensity of blues at the same time. And these will mainly be affected on the midtones. So I can choose highlights, for example, and on highlights I would like to have more cyan colors visible, for example. So that's another quite useful adjustment layer. Also can easily be in the exam. But don't forget that you have all these other adjustment layers as well, and it's worth checking all of them out. If you want to learn more about them and you don't understand how they work, just go to the official Photoshop help site. I included the link for you, so it's easier to find it. And that's all I wanted to show you about adjustments. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about the tools that you can use to retouch images. Well, we already covered this in previous topics, but here I'm going to focus mainly on the content-aware feature of Photoshop.